Hi there. It's lovely to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation to come down to my father's hometown, the only place where the surname loses its syllable. I'm O'Mahony here, and I know that. But I only recently discovered that actually my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, Michael McCann, who's the reason I'm here as well tonight, spent an important formative time here, because when he enlisted in the Royal Munster Fusiliers in November 1915, he was sent immediately to, is it Ahada? I pronounced it right. Where they had their training camp. So he spent about 6 weeks there in basic soldier training before being shipped over to France. So in April 1916, he would have been with the Royal Munster Fusiliers in France. That in a slightly holding pattern, they'd had a big battle earlier in the year. The Somme was going to develop in July, so his battalion, I gather, was sort of busy digging trenches and that sort of thing. But I found all of this out through independent research. I think one of the reasons that it felt really important to write about my grandfather was because he never spoke about any of these experiences himself. He had 10 children. None of them heard the story of his time as a British Army officer. They knew about the subsequent history because he came back from the war, joined the IRA, was busy fighting the good fight in the north of England and shooting policemen and things like that. They knew that. They knew about his role in the Civil War, but they didn't know about his time as a British Army soldier. And it just struck me that this was such a classic Irish experience of, what you could talk about, what you couldn't talk about, as Maureen said earlier, in relation to Leah, whatever you say nothing. People came back. The people who were lucky enough, and I use lucky in inverted commas, to survive the war, came back to a country where it was no longer possible to talk about their experiences, even if they'd wanted to. And one can only guess the traumas that they experienced that they were incapable of talking about. So I suppose that was one of the reasons why I wanted to try and recapture his history in the poem. So I'll read you a few. And I'd previously, well, I'll explain that in a minute. So Maureen mentioned this poem, Casting Lots, and actually the cover of the book is the photograph that's referred to here. My mother and her brothers and sisters had never seen this photograph. Casting Lots. History doesn't record how you decided it. The flip of a threepenny bit, a card, a straw in an unnamed pub somewhere in the English Midlands. You'd never mistake those grey tufts for Derry Ronaine. I doubt a white feather was behind it. More like you'd caught a thirst, the American liner stub still in your pocket. History does record that outward journey, SS Baltic from Queenstown, 27th of June 1913. You may have swum back just in time to have a pint with the brother and decide who'd go, who'd return to farm and family. I tried to picture the pair, two young broths, shoulders hunched at the bar, a tolerant English hand serving stout. It would become a lifelong devotion. High cheekbones, pale blue eyes weighing the future up. Family lore is mute on where or when you got yourself photographed. Kitted out as the pride of the Munster Fusiliers. Your granddaughter omits the royal. Did your tongue elide it? Like a child from a dress-up box, with your wide belt and your peaked cap, though the shaved head is a clue to the war game you're playing. Your right hand holds a cane, as if the photographer guessed the future legacy. Family legend is mute on when you sent it. I'm picturing it in slow motion, an envelope spiralling down like a chicken's feather, a scurry from the back to gather it up. Did it have pride of place on the mantelpiece? Did your mother turn a leaf of the family Bible, position you face down on the book of Joshua? As I said, that his own family had never seen this photograph. I had been doing some research, internet research, and came across a genealogical website where somebody else was asking questions about the McCanns of Derry Ronayne, which is in County Mayo. And I sent him an email, and it turned out this was a second cousin who was living in the UK and who had a whole batch of family photographs that had come down from his side of the family, including this photograph. And if you ever met my brother Tom, like, this is my brother Tom, it's the spit. So just to see this photograph was incredibly powerful, and it annoyed one of my aunts enormously that I put it on the cover of the book. Why didn't you put one of his Free State Army photographs on? But that kind of tells you a certain amount. And in this picture there is a stick, and there was a stick which he left to my mother, and my mother still has it, and it became the subject of another poem. It's called Walking Stick. An honest thing, ash shaft, plain, crook smooth, no gentleman's cane of silver or amethyst tip, of snakewood, crafted to bear weight, the tonnage of trench foot, splintered bones, toe lost in the ambush at Glore. Another conflict, the same cost. Shoved to the side or brandished as threat for the boys' divilment. They used bullets as toys. Did you silently smile as they echoed you? Needed more each year than daily, once another war, our emergency broke out, and you drilled the boys from the town to defend the realm against farmers' sons. Decommissioned once again into night watchman jobs in Coventry, in Cricklewood. You still looked tough. The stick found a hook in boarding houses. You'd only take it out after hours. It came to our house when you died, spent decades under the stairs till your daughter needed it, trimmed it down to size. A match for mine. I heft it up. It still bears its weight. He, as I said, after the World War I, we had the War of Independence, which he was involved in the north of England. Spent some time in Parkhurst prison, but came out as part of that general amnesty that followed the treaty. And because he was always a Collins man, I'm not sure where he met Collins, I'd love to know, but he was always a Collins man, so he joined the Free State Army and was stationed in Castlebar and Kiltimagh, where he met my grandmother. And that is another story, which is the basis of an earlier book, because that was an exciting time as well. And again, my grandmother was a slightly better source of information than my grandfather. She told some stories to my mother. And again, what the writer does is she seizes on what's available, imagines a lot of other material, and tries to put it together. It's not biography, it's poetry. So one hopes that they'll forgive me. So this is a poem taken from Trapping a Ghost, which tells the story. And this apparently did happen. My grandmother had been walking out with a young man who was on the Republican side. And she was supposed to meet him one night and he didn't turn up. And it was because he'd been involved in a shootout in Kiltimagh and had shot somebody dead and had gone on the run. And my grandfather, being a Free State Army commandant, was told to search my grandmother's house and refused, saying, "No damn civilian's going to tell me what to do." And he married my grandmother 4 years later. So this is taken from that. It's after the shooting. So I'm giving my grandmother a little walk-on part here. It's called Country Funeral. Kiltimagh, 28th of June 1922. The burial was today. Father insisted, saying it was our duty. I knew the women would look me up and down, whispering in clusters outside the church, "That's the one who was walking out with Flood." The church was thronged. We had to push to get to the benches at the back, close to the little flower, one candle lit beneath her. I kept my eye on that, on the flicker in the red glass, so I wouldn't have to look at the altar. From the front came Mrs. Brady's sobs, so steady and regular it was like the church taking breaths. The Latin couldn't drown her out, the breathing in and out of her tears. After the gospel, the priest spoke of cruel times. And didn't we know we shouldn't shelter those who had turned their faces from God? He paused, and in that instant I felt the congregation had turned and were staring through me. I just kept watching the flame, the red glass flickering to a heartbeat as a woman wept. So my grandparents have I suppose, caught my attention a lot. This year, clearly there's been a lot of focus on specific events leading up to 1916. And again, just as a sort of a testimony to something that actually did happen, we were up at Collins Barracks last summer, and they were in the process of shooting Rebellion, the TV show that was aired earlier this month. And we saw the events described in this poem happening as well, and it just struck me as slightly ironic. It's called O'Leary's Grave. They're reshooting The Rising up at Collins Barracks. White Winnebagos line up. Volunteers form an orderly queue for the catering. Asgard safely moored behind cordons. They'll get it in higher definition this time. Take all the takes they need, apply the makeup to pierce a squint expertly, Photoshop dev in if the director requires. Extras lounge about, drift in and out of colonnades, wander further afield, tall skinnies in hand. But Croppy's acre is padlocked. The corpo turned the key when the citizens started bedding down there, sharing sleeping bags and needles, messing up the view. Right now, 2 of them frisk a third who hasn't moved for hours. Still life, ready for his close-up. Cut in to romantic Ireland, blue inked on his wrist. Thank you.